Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm Associate Editor at Fine Gardening Magazine.
And I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm the Executive Editor here at FG. And today we're going seasonal, Carol. We are going to talk about unusual autumn perennials. But I'm already confessing I threw in one woody plant because I couldn't help myself. I couldn't. But I did 3 perennials. So for me, that's good. For somebody who really doesn't grow that many perennials.
Right. And it comes back in the spring. So, perennial.
That's right. It's true. But it's unusual. All of these plants, I feel like, are just... they're surprising. I mean, that's what I was thinking about. It was something that, maybe it's a plant you're familiar with, but it has a surprise in store for you at the very end of the season. Or maybe it's a plant you've never heard of before and you just, are walking through someone's garden and bam, it's like, whoa, what's that? That's crazy. How come it looks so good this time of year? Plants are supposed to be dying. What's happening here? Is that the approach you took as well?
Yeah, I like the idea of the unusual, and so I took like a twist on a cultivar that's much less usual. That's one of them, and that kind of thing. Yeah. Nice.
I like that. Throw in like a cultivar that people may not know. All right, well, let's kick it off, Carol. What you got for me?
Well, my first one is that unusual cultivar. So I grow straight species Joe Pyeweed, which is Eupatorium purpureum. Mm-hmm. But when I was at this really cool nursery, and unfortunately this nursery is no longer, it's a wedding venue now. But when I visited, Uncanunic Mountain Nursery was this incredible specialty nursery in southern New Hampshire. And they had I was there in October, and they had some fantastic fall plants. Mm-hmm. And the one that caught my eye, it was really close to where I parked, was chocolate Joe Pyeweed. And that's a Eupatorium rugosum. Mm-hmm. And the cultivar is chocolate. And it's smaller than the big honkin' straight species Joe Pyeweed. This one gets 3 to 4 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. So this is a nice, manageable size plant for the average garden, unlike its giant cousin. It's really hardy. It zones 4 to 8. And it is a selection from an Eastern North American species. What makes it special as opposed to the straight rugosum species, though, is the foliage, which, as you might have guessed from the name chocolate, it is purple, sort of bronzy, nice. Gorgeous, and darker earlier in the season. And as you get toward the end of the season in fall, when it starts to bloom, it goes sort of more green, but still with those bronzy hints in the foliage, which I'm just a sucker for bronze foliage in general. But the flowers are these little white fringy button-like flowers that just pop against that foliage. And it looks, I mean, I guess you can tell that it's related to the purpureum Joe Pyeweed, but it looks so different, and I just love it. It's very adaptable. It can grow it in most soil types, including sand and clay. It can grow in wet soil, and I think that the straight species is maybe a wetland species in its native habitat, but it will also grow in average soil or dry soil. And the site where I saw was a south-facing slope, dry. It was doing just fine. Full sun, and it can take a little bit of shade, but not too much, or it won't flower as well. It tolerates salt. And it's a butterfly magnet. At a time of year when a lot of plants are sort of winding down, you get good butterfly nectar flowers, which is kind of fun. So it's a fun plant and unexpected, I thought. So I threw it in, even though I don't grow this one myself yet.
No, I love that. And it seems like, God, it seems incredibly adaptable, because I think you start thinking about the Joe Pyeweed family, and, where you see it natively growing is usually in, swales, or, on the side of a road, or irrigation ditches, and there's this, I have this mindset that, oh, okay, that's going to need far more moisture than I'm going to be able to provide it. But, from what you're saying, highly adaptable as well. Or at least this particular species and cultivar are. That's awesome. That's awesome. And, something that we should talk about is, a lot of these that we're going to mention that are blooming, unusual perennials for fall, so important to pollinators, because there is that last push for, plants. We don't have a lot blooming in a lot of our gardens that time of year. So, the slim pickings for the pollinators is an issue. So being able to provide something that is such a good source of food for them is really important. So that's a perfect segue into my plant. And I'm going to do Snow Fairy Blue Mist Shrub. But yes, this is a Caryopteris, but is a true perennial Caryopteris. It is a Caryopteris that does not maintain a woody structure. It dies completely down to the ground. It is a pure dieback perennial. I loved Plant Delight's nursery. You go on to the listing for this plant, and it says, yes, Virginia, this is a Caryopteris. So it's a Caryopteris that doesn't look or behave like one. So this is a shrub-like habit, 2.5 feet tall and wide, and gosh darn it, if you saw this across the yard, you would immediately be beelining to it, because its foliage is very dense, but the leaves are almost pure white with a green splash in the middle. You start thinking, like, how is a plant that is this intensely variegated able to gather enough sunlight to keep itself going? Because it doesn't look like it has enough chlorophyll to make this plant stay alive, but it is. So, absolutely stunningly gorgeous as a variegated plant, for all the seasons except for winter. It'll take full sun into partial shade, and it likes well-drained soil like a lot of the Caryopteris do. I planted this in a friend's garden, a few of these in a friend's garden about 3 years ago. And I will say, this perennial, the Snow Fairy Blue Mist Shrub, or Blue Mist plant, I guess we should call it, it is a true sleep, creep, and then leap plant. So, first year it was, this little twig. Second year, all right, it crept out a little bit, and, she got so excited. She's like, it's got 3 stems. And then by the third year, this was a full 2.5 by 2.5 inch feet shrub. And, and then mid-fall hits pretty late, and it gets absolutely covered in these blue snapdragon-like flowers. And they're not a typical Caryopteris flower. If you know Blue Mist Shrub, it almost looks like a firework of a kind of puffy flower. That is not what this Caryopteris does. This has literal snapdragon, probably 1/4 inch long, with, complete with the little, scooped tongue to the flower. It's beautiful. These flowers are pinky nail size. They're really, really, and they cover the shrub, absolutely cover the shrub. So attractive in all the other months. And then, just because it's awesome, it's like, oh, mid-fall, nothing else is going on. I'm just going to throw out this beautiful blue flower show. And the bees go bananas. I mean, they truly are bonkers for this plant. You'll see them kind of hanging on to that cup-like flower for dear life and just, sipping out every inch of pollen they can get. I got to throw in one caveat to this. So I have one of these in my garden. This is the Snow Fairy Blue Mist Shrub, and I've not done it justice. I've moved it 3 times in 3 years. It doesn't like that. So I've done the best that I can this year, and I thought, oh, okay, I finally got it in the right spot. I moved it into the right spot. I was really good about babying it along through May. And then we have hit some extreme drought here in New England this summer. Like an eighth of an inch of rain for me in the last nearly 9 weeks. And this plant is suffering. Now, I don't know if that is indicative of it is not a drought tolerant Caryopteris, or if that's purely because I transplanted this plant this spring and it's struggling hardcore, and I can only give it so much water because we're on well here, and I don't want to run out of shower water. But so it might be something that's not entirely drought tolerant. But other than that, this is a spectacular plant that I just love and am obsessed with, and that is Snow Fairy Blue Mist Shrub. It's Caryopteris diverticata Snow Fairy, and it's zone 6 to 9, but I would say I am a very cool zone 6, so possibly 5B to 9.
You are a very cool zone 6.
Carol, that was a good one. All right, Carol, what else is on tap for you for unusual fall perennials?
I'm going to go with a little teeny tiny one, and that is October Daphne sedum. That's a species, not a cultivar, sedum seibolii, and it's hardy from zones 3 to 8. And like most sedums, it likes full sun, really well-drained soil, and it can take poor soil, no problem. Average to dry moisture conditions, not wet, definitely. And of course, drought tolerant once it's established. Gets only like 6 to 10 inches tall and then 12 to 18 inches wide. And the habit is sort of like a splaying habit. So it's a rounded some sort of mounded in the center with horizontal branches that spread out like, spokes of a wheel from that center where it emerges.
I'm kind of getting the sense of that then, it's kind of...
Yeah, exactly.
For nobody who actually who watches the podcast, you know what I'm doing here. I'm making like a little like almost octopus like I don't know what I'm doing. Don't mind me.
Universal hand symbol for a splaying habit.
Yes. All right, so I gotcha. Cool habit. Okay.
Cool habit, really cool foliage. It has little thick rounded leaves that are in little mini whorls of 3 that are evenly spaced along that stem. So it's covered in these little round sort of coin-like leaves that are beautiful glaucous, like sky blue, powdery blue, or greenish blue. It's a little bit coppery sometimes, and a beautiful scalloped pink edge. And that's what you can expect for most of the summer. And if it's super hot and dry, that pink edge gets a little more intense. And then at the end of the season, it puts out at the end of the stems these pretty neon pink star-shaped flowers that just pop against that foliage. And that's the photo that you'll see in the show notes, is that the blue foliage, pink flowers. But then after the flowers fade and when the weather gets even colder, you can get really good foliage color like oranges and pinks and a little purpley. This is more likely to happen if you've got it in really good sun. And I feel like where I have my plant right now, it is not quite optimal because I don't feel like I get that good foliage color. I've seen pictures. It looks amazing. So what I'm going to think about doing with this plant that I have is to move it into full sun, like really truly full sun, the most baking hot spot that I have, and see if that helps with the autumn color. I think also the plant gets a little more on the big side of its range when it has more sun, and that's my other indication I don't have it in quite the right spot because it stayed pretty small, sort of more toward the 6 inches tall instead of 10 inches tall. This is good for if you do a rock garden, which is kind of the situation I have. It's next to my front walk, and I have, mostly sedums mixed together there. It's good between stepping stones, but it's not a walkable. You can't step on it. And crevices of it, like a dry stack stone wall, it would be really cool there. And then you get it more trailing. And, it's so small. I think that's what makes it my unexpected fall plant, because it's something you might not notice if it wasn't in a really good spot.
Well, yeah, and I think just the fact that it's a sedum that gets fall color, like that's pretty cool too. And the fact that it has such interesting color all year long, and then it almost saves the best for last. It's like, oh, hey, you know how good I've looked all this time? Yeah, and now I'm going to add flowers on top of that, and I'm also going to change some color on my foliage as well. It's like, hey, what more could you ask from a plant? And being drought tolerant on top of it all. I mean, that's pretty much a no-brainer in my book. I also appreciate the fact, say the common name again.
October Daphne.
October
is what
Daphne.
A lot of people call it. Yeah.
So we've taken, a sedum known to be the toughest plant basically on the planet, next to junipers and daylilies. And then we paired it with its common name being a Daphne, which I'm sorry is one of the hardest plants on the planet to grow. So that's pretty cool. I like how somebody played around with that name a little bit. All right, I like this plant. I'm excited to go to the show notes on finegardening.com. Hit the podcast tab, people. Then you get to see pictures of all these plants, and you won't have to go through, our descriptions or our hand gestures that we have on the video to try and figure out what this thing looks like. All right, so I'm going to go to a plant that I don't currently have in my garden, but is something that is a twist, and I'll do, kind of like your Joe Pye weed that kicked off the show. This is an aster. It's a calico aster, and it's lady in black calico aster, and that is Centrochium laterifolium, lady in black, zones 3 to 8, and a plant that I think came across in Dan Hinckley's garden, Wincliffe, which is just outside of Seattle. Dan Hinckley, a super cool plantsman from the Seattle Pacific Northwest, explorer extraordinaire, and everywhere you turn in his garden is a plant that you've never even heard of, let alone seen. And then I come across an aster, and I'm thinking, what the heck? This seems so normal for Dan Hinckley, but it is not a normal aster. It is so spectacularly beautiful because this 3 foot tall and wide aster, so this is a big boy, has these beautiful sprays of branches that are covered in needle-ish, lance-like tiny leaves that are dark purple, nearly black. So obviously that's where it gets its common name of lady in black aster. And it's stunning. I did not see it when I was at Dan's garden. I did not see it in bloom, and I thought, whatever this is, I gotta have it, and found out it was an aster. So that's kind of, its unusual quality. And then, that's what it maintains, is that gorgeous foliage, spring into summer, beginning of fall. You start to see that it's putting on these buds that are in sprays at the tips of each one of these splaying branches. And those eventually evolve in mid-fall into these gorgeous pink-like daisies, teeny tiny little pink daisies that are all arranged in these big sprays. And it lights up, asters in fall, that is pretty typical. You do think about, that's a great plant for fall. Pollinators love it. So it's just a nice contrast too, that you've got this dark foliage and then these, pretty and pink flowers that are on the edges and tips. Asters, full sun, well drained, lean, you name it soil, and they tend to do okay in it. I just like the fact that the foliage isn't boring, and what really holds me back for a lot of asters, or even solidago for me falls into this category, is if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was a weed for probably most of spring and summer until it actually bursts into bloom, and you go, oh, that's why I have this lump of green foliage. But this one, lady in black calico aster, you'd know that it wasn't a weed for spring and summer, and then be pleasantly surprised by its floral show in mid-fall. So big fan. Tends to be a little bit more resistant to the rusts that asters can get, the rust disease that kind of sets in. But I will say, if you're in a southern location with a lot of humidity, you can pretty much bank on your asters getting rust no matter what. But the hope is that it puts on a big enough flower show that you don't really notice that the foliage has kind of gone downhill by the time fall rolls around.
One thing I did grow this.
You did? Okay. Yeah. Do report back.
Tragically, I have discovered that it is not deer resistant. The first year that I grew it, I had 3 plants together, and it was spectacular. I had honeybees coming from I don't even know where, but it would just be covered with honeybees from somebody's hive. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, I'm going to move it out next to the road and put a show on for the neighborhood. And immediately the next season after I moved it, the deer just ate it to the ground, and it was never the same again.
Oh, man.
So super, like if you have deer, you have to spray this one.
Okay, good to know.
But it's such a cool plant.
Good to know. Yes, and actually, from we did a trial with Richard Hockey, and this was one of the top-rated asters that Richard Hockey did. You can find that article on finegardening.com. But he also mentioned that, yes, deer like asters, but not only that, rabbits really like asters too. So, yeah, we all right. Caveat, if you have a rabbit population like Watership Down, or you have deer, you do not want to have this plant, or protect it. It. Right, Carol. So a Daphne sedum and a cool Joe Pye weed that is very adaptable and with beautiful chocolate foliage. You've set the bar high. Come on, bring it on home with a third plant here.
Okay, so I got one with a little bit of a naughty name. It's Black Neglige Bugbane.
I love it. We just had Lady in Black, and now we've got a negligee thrown in there for fun.
So that's an Actaea simplex, and the cultivar Black Neglige. So as you could guess from that, it's another one of these bronze-leaved plants. And I don't feel like an Actaea is an unusual choice for fall, but this one in particular, I think of as more of a foliage plant. I have this. It looks great all season with its deeply cut purple-black foliage, and it gets nice and big, 4 to 5 feet tall, like a couple feet wide. It's more of a narrow habit, sort of a vase-shaped habit, and you enjoy that foliage all season long. And then at the end of the season, it starts putting out these sprays of these amazing flower buds, and that's when I go, oh yeah, you flower too.
I
forgot. And the flower buds are deep purple, shiny. I'll put a picture of those in the show notes along with a picture of the flower that follows, which is pure white foamy wands of flowers, and they're super fragrant. And the descriptions sort of vary of what people think this fragrance is. I would say it's a little bit fruity. It's a little bit floral. It's like a nice perfume. It's like a non-offensive perfumey smell. And it's the type of thing where you're walking around the garden, you think, what is that wonderful smell? And you track it down, and it's coming from Black Neglige. It likes organically rich, fertile soil that holds moisture well. And we've been talking about this drought that we've been going through. I love my one Black Neglige plant, and so I added 3 Hillside Black Beauty, which is another cultivar, this spring. And then we had this dry summer, and it died back to the ground. So I was a bad girl. I didn't water those new plants. But what I can tell you is that the established one did just fine. It's a little smaller than it has been in years past, but once established, and this is probably a 4 or 5 year old plant, The drought didn't bother it. I didn't give it any extra water. It is still looking like it's going to get ready to flower, so that isn't been lost. But those baby plants they took a hit, and I think they'll be back. Actually, we have new foliage pushing up from the crown right now, toward the end of summer. But yeah, I should water it, and just to get it, strengthened up, and maybe move it to a wetter spot if I can find one next year, because I think that is the key with these.
Yeah. Do you think, Carol, do you think they'd be happiest with consistent moisture no matter what? Okay.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's really what they prefer. They do like shade too. Full shade it will take. Partial shade is kind of more ideal, especially if you like the flowers. So I think the shade helps too to retain the moisture, but think of it as being like sort of a woodland plant, but a moist woodland plant.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, it's such a beautiful plant. It really is. There was we did a garden design feature several years ago. It was in Wisconsin. The author's name escapes me. Apologies ahead of time, but it was about planting in masses, and they had used, I believe it was brunette, which is another purple foliage Actea, and they had used that in a mass, and it was the first time that I had seen probably a dozen or more Actea that were all grouped together, and there was just this one photo of them all in bloom, and it was stop you in your tracks gorgeous, so beautiful. And I do remember that, at that point I was like, oh wow, that is so powerfully fragrant, because all of them all at once, but and the activity from all of the bees that were in, and the little parasitic wasps that were all over that mass was pretty cool. It was hard to get a picture that was in focus, that wasn't blurry, because they were moving the plant so much with these pollinators. But yeah, that's a good plant. I think just solidly overall, like just a solid fall plant, and with these kind of unusual cultivars that are out there. Black negligee sounds like naughty but nice. Naughty but nice. Well, all right, so let's go. So we'll go from naughty to an angel. My next plant is Golden Angel Japanese Shrub Mint, and that's Leucoceptrum japonicum Golden Angel, zones 5 to 8. I saw a few sources when I was researching this that said zone 4. I don't know. Write into the podcast if you grow this in zone 4, because I was a little skeptical of that. But are you sensing a theme? This is a perennial that gets to be about the size of a shrub. So it does well in Danielle's garden scheme. 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. This is not a shrinking violet of a perennial. Please don't think because its common name is Japanese shrub mint that it is a runner and it will take over. It's not at all. I don't think that there's any strain of its family that's related to mint. I know that you can crush the leaves and they do have a bit of a mentha kind of fragrance to them, and I did notice that the stems are 4-sided, so that is a characteristic of the mint too. So I'm assuming that's where it gets its mint, but not a runner, a clumper, stays well behaved. Partial to full shade, and I'll say the Golden Angel cultivar is a gorgeous lance-shaped, larger leaved plant that has a chartreuse to golden foliage color. Put it in partial shade, it's going to be gold. You put it in more of the full shade range, it's going to be a chartreusey green color. Moist, well-drained soil. I give it well-drained, lean, dry soil. Does well. So there you go. I feel like this is a relative unknown plant or a lesser known plant by folks. It looks good year round. I have it paired, and it's a perfect pairing with wee white smooth hydrangea, which is a dwarf smooth hydrangea, and it's such a lovely pairing. They play so nicely together because that smooth hydrangea's got the dark green foliage up against the Golden Angel, and then so you don't get sick of the foliage. Then the hydrangea puts on its big puffy white flowers that also look nice with the golden angel in the background. And then when those hydrangea blooms start to fade, golden angel comes in and says, hey, don't forget about me. It's October, but I'm going to flower now. So it puts on these kind of bottle brush-like yellow flowers at its stem tips. And that's late fall for us. I had pictures of this, and it was mid to late October that I was taking photos of the flowers. I feel like, on the years that we might get one of those really early frost, I might not get flowers on this plant. I've never really noticed that happen yet, but I'm prepared for it. But in any case, it looks great year round, except for winter, because it is a perennial. But it looks great for all those, spring, summer, fall months. And with that late bloom, it just adds another level of interest, just a kind of a bonus and something that you weren't really expecting. And that the bees don't expect either, because they love that, that bottle brush-like flower that you were kind of just describing with the Actea that, Aesculus gets to, the buckeye trees get. They just love that bottle brush. It makes them and very happy and attracts them. So again, this is Golden Angel, Japanese shrub mint, and that's Leucoceptrum japonicum. You're in the good range if you're in zones 5 to 8 for it. All right, we are nearing the end of our unusual autumn perennials episode here, and I think we've done pretty well in the unusual. We stuck to autumn. We both of us so far have stuck to perennials. So, what's your last plant, Carol?
So it's not really unexpected to do a grass in the fall perennials, but I chose one that I feel like I don't see this one nearly as much as some of the other grasses. And this one is Gold Tow Tufted Hair Grass. So that's a Deschampsia cespitosa. Gold Tow, which
Say
is
that 3 times.
Yeah. Gold Tow is, I think, gold dew is how that translates. And I think is German. I'm not sure, but I think. So this one is very unspectacular early in the season. It makes, I'm sorry to say it, guys, but it is. It makes a mound of medium green foliage that's 1 to 2 feet tall. And in my garden, you could be forgiven for mistaking it for a really robust clump of crabgrass. But it does, it beefs up as the summer goes on. And then toward the end of summer, it puts out these tall inflorescences, long, slender stems, and they spray out in all directions. And they start out green, but then as fall comes on, they turn gold. And that, I think, is where that cultivar name comes from. Lots of movement. It's the kind of thing you come around the corner and you see it, you go, what is that one? Yeah, it's just a really cool look. And especially, that low angle autumn sunlight coming through it either in the morning or the evening with a little wind blowing it. It's a super cool looking plant. And I feel like for every 100 Carl Forrester featherweight grass, I see maybe one of these out there. Mm-hmm. And people don't tend to plant it in groups. They tend to plant, 1 or 2 together. Which is fine. I think it works either way. But when it's a specimen, when it's just one and it has that explosion of like those fiber optic bouquet things that they had way back in the day. And
yes, when you went to ice capades or something.
Yeah. Because it seems to glow. And yes, airy is a good adjective for it. It's adaptable to many soil types and moisture conditions, takes well-drained soil. It can be seasonally flooded, no problem. When I first added this to my garden, I read somewhere that it was a European plant, and I was disappointed because I thought it was native. Turns out this is one of those, what do they call it? The whole northern hemisphere. It's distributed across the whole northern hemisphere in the places where it's hardy, and it is hardy from zones 3 to 8. So yeah, it's quite adaptable, and of course, the straight species is the native. This is selection from the straight species, but I don't know. It's something. It's one that I wish more people would grow, because I love to see it sort of out there in the wild of gardens that we.
Yeah. It is one of the rare, I will say, but we see a lot of gardens, Carol, and it is one of the rarer grasses that you see in a garden. And I feel like my first time seeing it was Vancouver. So this is going to give you an idea of its range. Was out in Vancouver. Dave Demers, who's a contributor to Fine Gardening, excellent garden designer, he uses it a lot in his designs, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool looking grass, and at that point had never heard of it. And now to go across the continent, we're about to feature a garden that's in Marblehead, Massachusetts by Adam Woodruff. Pick up the next issue of Fine Gardening in about a month, guys, and it's in our late fall, early winter, and he has a bunch of gold tow tufted hair grass in his garden. So that's about as far away a spectrum as you can get, and both places just a really interesting grass that looked really, really cool, and adds that that almost like blonde highlights to the scene. It's a good one. That is a good one.
So does Adam use a lot of it?
He
together?
Does, because because this designer Adam Woodruff, who's super cool, he does a lot of naturalistic and matrix like planting, so he uses that as one of his very select few grouped plants, and so that is one of it, and it looks really cool, but it's well behaved too, I will say, which is kind of nice. We've gotten into the mode where a lot of these grasses and ornamental grasses, aside from miscanthus, we all know it's bad, it spreads, it's invasive, but even a lot of other grasses tend to be kind of thuggish, they kind of take up more space than they should, and they splay all over the place and split and don't stand tall and stay nice. But gold tow has a nice habit, a really nice habit. That doesn't come across as a good compliment. You've got a nice habit, but yeah, it is a good compliment for a grass. So I like that one. That was way to end on a bang there, Carol. All right, sorry, I'm doing a small tree, large shrub. I couldn't help myself. But guys, this is a cool, practically, I'm going to say unknown, small tree, large shrub. And it's Sapphire Berry. So that's Simplocos paniculata, zones 4 to 8. So that'll be my excuse. That's why I threw it in here. I wanted to make sure I made zones 4 happy. And it's going to be 10 to 15 feet tall and wide, full sun, well-drained. Acidic soil is its preference, but it's a little bit adaptable, so you don't have to have northeast native soil for it to be happy. Gorgeous, kind of cinnamony / silver bark, so that's really pretty. A nice kind of vase-like habit to it. I first saw this, and the only place I've ever seen this, in Quack and Grass Nursery, which is an online plant seller, and it's in Connecticut. They have some really weird plants, so if you're looking for unusual plants for fall, spring, and summer, go there. But just came across it, and you saw it from across the way, because this gorgeous blueberries just filling this tree has these gorgeous, kind of glossy green, I don't know, they're teardrop shaped leaves to it, so kind of an attractive tree no matter what. Gets sprays of white flowers that are kind of in the early to midsummer range, and then those give way to these bright sapphire blueberries that are in huge clusters all over the tree. It really does stop you in your tracks. It was just a gorgeous, and what's that? And I'm climbing up into the branches going, oh, well, it's got opposite leaves. I'm not sure what it is. Never come across it before or since, and just interesting, very interesting. Now the other thing I'll say, which was kind of a bonus, was as sitting there staring at this gorgeous specimen from afar, the bird activity alone was impressive. You had all of these native songbirds that were dive bombing into this tree and grabbing berries left and right. But the volume of the berries that it puts on, this is not like a winter berry where, all right, the birds come in for a week and it's stripped bare. There's so many berries that there's plenty for the birds and for you to enjoy as a beautiful display through the fall months. So that's Sapphire Berry, a very cool, not perennial, but a small tree / large shrub that's just so gosh darn unusual. I had to get it in there. Totally had to get it in there.
I love that you have a plant I had never heard of before. And that's, like you said, it's pretty rare for us to come across one we've never heard of before. That's right. Very cool.
All right. Well, thanks for giving me a pass, Carol.
Give you a pass, totally. Anytime, girl.
And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about why he likes Unusual Suspects.
Despite the fact that I'm a fan of the film The Usual Suspects, I myself am a man who tends to gravitate more toward unusual suspects. I like oddballs. Whether it's the athlete that is known not only for throwing screwballs, but also for his screwball behaviour, or the woman at the bank who likes to sing 1970s yacht rock tunes to her customers. These folks are what makes life worth living. They add colour, spice, and all-round interest to our existence. That's why I love today's podcast topic on unusual fall perennials. It hits on several unexpected levels. Yes, Danielle and Carol covered plants that have unusual traits, but they display those unusual traits best during a time period that's outside of the norm. Not the peak gardening seasons of spring and summer, but autumn, a time unusually associated with the slow decline of the garden. Now, where did I develop this affection for misfits? Maybe I was influenced by the music that sprang out of the counterculture in the 1960s. Maybe it was my time spent in cities around the globe that seemed to embrace characters of all kinds. Or maybe it's simply because I see myself as a bit of an oddball. Who knows? All I can say is that I've always surrounded myself with individuals who tend to live outside the mould of convention. And like a colourful fall garden bursting with excitement, my life has never been dull. God save the Queen and the oddballs.
Knowing Peter like we do, Carol, it doesn't surprise me that he likes oddballs.
He likes us.
So true. So true. All right, let's see if the expert likes us too. So as it turns out, our expert actually does like unusual oddballs. We've got Mattus here with us today. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Hey, Danielle, I'm great.
Awesome.
I'm getting ready for fall.
Oh, that it makes me sad in a way, but it also makes me happy. And I'm so thrilled to be talking to you, listeners. You probably know the name Matt Mattus. He is one of our regional reporters on finegardening.com. He represents the Northeast region. He gardens in Worcester, Massachusetts, and is also the author of several gardening books, including Mastering the Art of Flower Gardening and Mastering the Art of Vegetable Gardening too, right, Matt? That's your latest one.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. All right. So is it starting to turn into fall in your garden?
Well, it rained, so that helps.
Yes, that's a rarity this year.
Oh, yeah. But it is. I mean, I'm sure everyone is noticing this at home too, right? The nights are cooler. And as I guess, sadly to say, the sun is setting later, although I'm a winter person, so I'm one of the few gardeners who like that.
Oh, that's good. Well, having been to your garden and seen all that you do in your garden, I think that's probably the only time that you take a teeny tiny little break because you've got a lot going on over there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, but is there really a break?
No, there is not. There is not. So Matt, you put some thought into this, some unusual autumn perennials, and I'm curious what you came up with for plants that you absolutely love.
Well, yeah, it's funny because especially for like plant enthusiasts out there, we're naturally drawn to unusual. but that unusual list gets shorter and shorter. But I have to go back into my head and say, like, what? When we first start gardening, we all think, fall mums and, black-eyed Susans and grasses. But once you start expanding that palette, you realize there's a lot. There are a lot of things that bloom in the fall.
So true.
Personally, I like gentians because they, like, we think of blue gentians, and it's a huge genus, right? So if you're not familiar with gentians, there are many more than, they're blue and white and pink ones, generally one or two yellow ones, but most of them are really difficult to grow and challenging. But there are some great ones that are good garden plants.
Really? That, you don't have to sit over with a flashlight and sing to it in order for it to do well? Because that is my impression of gentians.
Yeah, it was mine too. I mean, but I think if you first start wherever you live, if you start with your native gentians, which, you can find out, through your local plant clubs in your area, which are the native ones, certainly not collecting them in the wild, but there most likely are named varieties or cultivars of the native gentians. The bottle gentian is one that stays closed. And I don't know if you've seen it in here, at least it grows like from Canada to Missouri through the east. But there's my friend Daryl Probst, who's a plant breeder, bred one called True Blue, which you could find at most good garden centers.
And so that's gentian. Is that a particular species, Matt?
Yeah, it is. It's actually it's Andrewsii. I think it's Andrewsii crossed with Gentiana McInnoy or Gentiana scabra.
Okay, and the cultivar name is True Blue.
True Blue is the cultivar name. It's patented. You'll see it sold with pumpkins a lot, like at big bookstores.
Okay.
But it's purple. It's not really blue, but it's really spectacular. I mean, the commercial ones you'll find at garden centers, just like asters and a lot of and mums, have been sprayed with plant growth regulators, so they're denser, which actually makes them much prettier.
Yeah.
And I think they sell it as, a temporary plant to throw into a pumpkin or to put into a window box, which is fine. But if you put it in the garden, it's a long-lived perennial.
Wow.
It'll just grow taller, because it's not being sprayed with growth regulators.
So what are we maxing out as for an overall height and width for a True Blue gentian?
I'd say 18 inches.
Okay.
I think 18 is how they list it. It's a little floppy. So if you, like me, plant your perennial border densely, it does really well.
Okay. All right.
Half shade, half sun. But there's a white form, right? There's a white form of Gentiana Andrewsii, which is kind of hard to find, but places like Plant Delight's catalog carry it occasionally. They still list it, but it's out of stock, I know. Okay. That's my favorite because it's a white form, and in the wild there'll be light blue forms and lavender forms and the white. But boy, the white one, it's called milk bottles. That's the patented name for it, which is a great name if you remember what milk bottles were.
Yeah, so it's got that narrow kind of neck to it, and then it kind of bulbs out. We're talking about the blossom, so the back of the blossom kind of bulbs out. Does it ever open fully, or it keeps that shape?
No, bees have to open it, so it stays pretty much closed. You might think, when is this going to open? I have it in bud now in the garden. It's probably been there for 5 years, and it's probably almost 2 feet in diameter, but it's just covered in flowers in the fall.
Oh, that's so cool. I had to laugh because all I can think is this, big fat bumblebee trying to fit himself into the flower, like me trying to get into shorts in the spring, It's like, oh, put on that winter weight.
I should add a Nemonopsis. I don't have it on my list, but I have one that bloomed yesterday. That's the rare white one, which I think I'll plant with this. But a Nemonopsis it's blooming now, so I guess it's not technically fall. Let's say it's August and early September.
Okay, all right, that counts.
There's a white called Alba that's beautiful, but it is hard to find. But I know like 3 mail order nurseries that carry it. But the purple one's beautiful too. That's easily found.
That's all right. So we got a bonus plant in that.
We got a bonus plant in there. But the easiest gentian is Septemphida.
Okay, not familiar.
It's a low growing. It'll look like a fancy alpine that you might think is impossible to grow.
Okay.
I grow them from seed. I order seed from Germany, from Gelato Seeds, and they have like 3 or 4 different cultivars, and then the pure species. I get so many, I'm throwing them in the compost pile. I know.
Don't say that on our podcast, Matt, because people are going to be emailing us and emailing you like, hey, send me those. Don't throw them away.
Composting's good. We know that.
It's true. It's true. All
But
right.
it's easy to grow. Yeah. So I grow it in troughs and it comes back every year. I mean, for 10 years, I have it in troughs, but I have it out front. The extra ones I put out front in my sort of hell strip, and it blooms every September and October, maybe 7 inches tall, 8 inches tall.
Okay. Now, and say that genus and species again. So that's Gentiana.
Yeah, Gentiana septemphida. So it's spelled almost like September.
Okay.
If you just Google it and you start typing September, you'll find it.
Okay.
And it's found at garden centers. I think people shy away from it, but
and clearly tough as far as a gentian is concerned, because if you got it in your hell strip, that's a tough plant.
It's the toughest. Yeah, I think it's the toughest for sure.
That's cool.
That's it for gentians. The rest are probably impossible to grow, except maybe the willow leafed one, which I don't have, so I can't speak about it. But I know it's an easy to grow one.
An easy to grow gentian. All right, so we'll revisit that one. We'll revisit that. So that's pretty cool. And you know what? Like I had seen some of the plants that Carol was going to talk about, and I know the ones I'm going to talk about. And neither one of us touched on gentians. So you hit it out of the park with that one, Matt. Do you have anything else on your list that you whittled things down to and said, yeah, that's a great unusual autumn perennial?
I have, well, it's a bulb technically.
Okay, still counts.
I put down tuberoses because they are a favorite of mine, probably because I went to college in Hawaii, and the cheapest lei you can get in Hawaii, I know that sounds bad, but the cheapest one you get at the airport is a tuberose lei. But that smell reminds me of like my college years. But here so I live in New England, as you do. Tuberoses have a long history in New England. They were grown, through the 1700s. It was one of the first bulbs that came on sailing ships that, you would find grown on estates. So if you buy any old gardening book from like the 1800s, you'll see, a whole chapter on tuberoses. They were grown in pots, and they would bury the pots in the ground because they bloom so late. So that's part of that really helped me understand how to grow them better, because they start to bud up in October, and then it's okay. I just bury a clay pot in the ground, and then I bring it into the house when it blooms, and if there's frost. But many years lately, they just bloom outdoors.
Okay. Now tell me, Matt. All right. So what I'm going to do, in order to grow these in cooler zones, well, what is its normal zonal range? Is it in the?
I say it's probably 9 or 10. I don't know.
Okay.
But it's kind of it's definitely a warm weather plant. Okay. So if you do like a Google tuberose, you're going to find Polyanthes tuberosa. That was the Latin name, but I didn't even know this. It was changed to agave. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. And I actually think that it's being featured in our next issue. So I better go back and look at that tech edit.
Yeah, I guess they were originally in the 1700s was named agave amica, and now in 1999 a taxonomist moved it there, and then officially it was moved there in 2017, but you're never going to find it listed as that.
Okay. All right. All right. So, easily attainable through mail order tuberose bulbs. They're going to come. Is this something that is something I'm going to order in fall, arrives in spring? Then what you're doing, or for anybody who's listening who's in cooler zones, you're potting directly into a clay or terracotta pot, a couple of bulbs per pot.
Yeah, and depends where you buy them from. Like dahlias, sometimes you'll get a clump.
Okay.
From the Dutch growers, and those are actually better, the clump ones. But I pot them, and they can be in rather small pots, like an 8-inch pot, and you're burying it into the ground. It doesn't hurt to dig them up either if you just want to plant them out. I mean, some years they bloom as early as late August, September.
Okay, all right. But definitely, much like for us, at least in the Northeast and in cooler zones than, zone 6, you'd have to lift them like you do a dahlia tuber.
Yeah, you should be. Okay. Yeah, you have to lift them, but they survive a winter. You
Okay.
could probably, if you have them in pots, they survive like dahlias. You could keep them in the pot dry in a cellar or somewhere cool.
Oh, I like that. I'm all about lazy gardening. I
Yeah.
am all about it. So what are we looking at? Do we get a range of colors? And what does the flower of it, for those listening who aren't familiar with tuberoses, what does the flower actually look like?
Well, it's a tube-shaped flower, I guess. I mean, they
Okay.
come with a single form and a double form called the pearl. Those are the
Okay.
two classic old cultivars. But there's been a lot of breeding lately with them.
Okay.
So there are pink and pale yellow ones available now. I haven't tried them yet, but I'm sure they're outstanding. If you grow mangaves, you know the mangave,
Yeah.
the intergeneric cross between Manfreda and agave, so they both look like agaves basically.
Okay.
When mangaves bloom, they look just like tuberoses,
Oh, okay.
and then you'll see the family resemblance, except they
Okay.
smell like nail polish remover, not like
No. So definitely doesn't take after the rose part
no,
of
it has
its
nothing to do
name.
with roses. But you know, in the old days, let's say in the 1700s, a lot of plants had the word rose in them, like primrose,
Yes. Okay.
and tuberose. So that's, I think the name probably came from that. But
Gotcha.
anyways, it grows on a stalk, like maybe let's say like a gladiolus, sort of like a tall singular stalk with the flowers at the end.
Okay.
And they're waxy white, super fragrant, like a gardenia on steroids. They might
Okay.
be too fragrant for some people, but
Okay. All right. And
just
is the foliage at the base going to be more of like a basil rosette, kind of like what we're accustomed to with a mangave?
yeah, it's even thinner. It's more like it's a basil rosette, but they're thin leaves, so it looks like a yucca.
Oh, okay. All right. I gotcha. Or like a hesperaloe or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. They're closely related too, so you see
Oh,
that
neat.
family resemblance.
That's so cool. That is definitely an unusual pick. So, how tall again, Matt? And I apologize if you said, but
I didn't. It's probably 3 feet tall.
oh, okay.
I would
That's
say.
sizable.
Yeah, well, I mean, the foliage is probably only a foot tall.
Hmm.
So we're talking the flower stalk can be very tall.
Nice. And for those of us living in, more of a chilly environment, you can expect though they're going to be bringing up the end of the garden season. Late fall is when they're going to put on their blooms.
Yeah, they are. They're late. They're before the monk's hoods, which are the latest
Okay.
in my garden, but
Yeah.
they're they can be, like I said earlier too. I suppose if you start them indoors, which is a good tip, I would start them indoors where it's warm. If your tubers arrive in March or April or even May, if it's still cool out, they
Yeah.
like warm soil. So I would
Okay.
pot them up and start them indoors and then plant them out after frost.
Okay. And let's be clear, because I think I might have gotten this crossed, that the mangave, when it blooms, smells like nail polish remover. But
Yeah.
does the tuberose smell like nail polish remover too when it blooms?
No, tuberose
Okay. All
smells
right.
like really fragrant, like really cheap cologne.
Oh, awesome. All right. Like CVS Axe body spray. That's what
That's
I'm.
it. Yeah, it's the cultivar name.
Hey, we could retire. We just figured out the newest cultivar. It's going to sell like hotcakes. Well, that's awesome. And Matt, you got anything else on your list? I know, like I threw it out there and said maybe 3 plants or so. Is there anything else that you just feel like readers definitely, or listeners, excuse me, definitely need to know as far as unusual and or perennial options?
Yeah, I was just throw out quick, because I know these are in your book. I mean, in the latest issue of the magazine,
Hmm.
right? So you talk about Triceratus, and there are a lot of Triceratus,
Yes.
the toad lilies, right?
Yeah.
And they're all good, right? And then there's the yellow ones like Macrantha or subspecies Mccranthopsis. Sometimes it's sold as, and that's pretty outstanding. But I've always had trouble growing it, and I think a lot of people they struggle with it because it's so floppy. Because in
Mhm.
Japan it grows on hillsides, but I grow it in pots.
Ah,
And I know a lot of plant people, like in the Rock Garden Society, who also grow it in like long toms. Like if they have to be like 14 inches tall off the ground,
interesting.
and then they look spectacular. And then I bury the pot, so the whole root ball in the winter in the ground. But if people aren't familiar with it, it looks like a yellow lily, really, right? On a droop
Yeah.
plant.
Yes.
Doesn't look
Yes.
like any of the other toad lilies, which many people may not be familiar with, even the common ones like Triceratus hirta. But
Hmm.
I say go to the garden center in the fall. That's you should be going every 2 or 3 weeks anyways to see what's there. And then you will, at a good garden center, you will see these toad lilies, the Triceratus, which are all from Asia and put on great shows.
They definitely do. They're the closest thing I think that, especially in New England, that we could grow that looks like an orchid
Oh, right. Yeah,
outdoors.
they do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are good. That's any toad lily, I feel like. There's one I've been lately obsessed with. I think it's called Gilt Edge or Gilt Edge, where it's got a nice like gold edge to the foliage, because
Oh,
that's the one thing I get impatient having to wait for them to bloom all year. And so if you've got a little variegation on that foliage, it kind of it carries it through the seasons where it might not be putting on its show for me.
yeah. And some have speckled leaves.
Mhm.
But that's Triceratus Formosana, the one that often has a variegation that's a stripe, right?
Yeah.
There's like one, I've seen it at Garden Centers just a week ago called Samurai, which has a golden yellow stripe. And then Autumn Glow has like a golden stripe with a little bit of red in it.
Okay. Oh, that
So
sounds
two
nice
named
too.
cultivars that are really nice. They're just nice in foliage. I mean, the flower looks like all other Triceratus, like purple speckles, which is
Yeah.
fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're right. They're good right from spring, those striped ones.
They are. They definitely are. If you didn't know any better, you'd think that it was a Solomon seal for some of these,
Yeah.
if you're just looking really quick.
That's a good note. They do.
So anything else that you just feel like needs to be mentioned?
I would just mention, and I'm sure everyone's brought this up already, but it would be like the black-eyed Susans. Like there's just a lot of confusion about what's hardy and what's not, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yes. I won't name any plant breeders specifically on this
Yeah, I
podcast in
won't
case
either.
they're a sponsor. But yes, many plant breeders have not done us any favors in that genus or in the Coreopsis genus either. We
Yeah.
never know what's hardy and what's not.
No, you don't. And with Coreopsis, yeah, especially, and that's a whole other talk.
next podcast.
Right.
So yes, black-eyed Susans. You know what? You'll be surprised, Matt. Nobody has talked about black-eyed Susans yet on this particular topic. Do you have a favorite?
I do have a favorite. I mean, there's a picture of me like in our family photo album when I was like 3 years old, standing naked in a field of black-eyed Susans that my parents grew from seed. So I guess that makes me always.
It's a
like
heartstring plant.
it's
For
in
you.
me. Yeah, it makes my heart pound. So there's so many common ones you find, right? That they're all good, right? But they're boring to see on, unless you get, the fine cut flower annual ones.
Yeah.
But there's a couple annual ones that, yeah, they're tender perennials, let's say in the South or in zone 6 even, but
Okay.
in zone 5 or even 6A, they're short-lived. You're lucky if you get 2 years out of them.
Okay.
But one I grow from seed, which is Redbeckia Triloba. So it's short-lived. You're lucky if it comes back 2 years in a row, but it's tall and branchy and airy and has small flowers that look like they're brushed with coffee almost.
Oh.
It's just it's a color that blends so well in the fall in the garden.
Right. It picks up on those, kind of those copper tones, I bet, and a lot of like the native foliage. Yeah.
And the purple because the stems are maroon and it really works well design-wise in the garden.
Gorgeous.
But I would say that like we learned a lot from the cut flower growers. Like they grow, like if you see the beautiful varieties like, I don't know, Goldilocks, like Cherokee Sunset, right? Or Prairie Sun or Sonora, the ones that are like copper colored or bronze, the big flowers. Those are considered tender perennials too, but most people grow them as annuals, and you should definitely grow them as annuals. Cut flower growers plant those every 3 weeks from seed through the whole summer.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
the first flower is the best. So I plant those at least 3 times from seed, starting in with the early ones in March and then set them out.
Wow. And again, but as you were saying, like that color scheme with, those bronzes, those coppers, a little bit of that burgundy in there, and then that dark eye, I'm assuming that they all have that dark brownish eye to them. What a gorgeous like infusion into the fall garden.
Yeah. And people I think are frustrated growing them because you'll see some, on social media saying you need to winter sow them, and you don't.
Okay.
You know, they germinate regardless of the time. They like warm soil. They grow very quickly. My last sowing I do in early July, and they're just coming into bud now. So
that's so
yes,
cool.
they're very fast to bring into bloom. So don't be discouraged if you buy them at a garden center in a 6-pack and they were too old and they just sort of petered out. Try them from seed and start them indoors under lights for your first batch, and then don't expect them to perform all summer. Like, just a couple may winter through, but treat them as annuals.
I love that. That's such a good tip. That's a perfect tip for success. So, Matt, I just want to say, like, thank you so much. This was really unexpected. And we threw out so many plant names back and forth here. I want to remind everybody, as we often do when we're taping some of the segments, we're going to put plant lists online for you at finegardening.com. Click the podcast tab, and I hopefully can whittle some photos from Matt, because he's a great photographer, maybe some photos of some of these plants as well that we'll put up there in our show notes, so you know exactly the plants that he mentioned and talked about. And and don't throw out those gentians. We got plenty of listeners that'll take them.
I promise we'll set that up.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Danielle. Bye.
Well, Carol, we've done it again. You, me, our experts, Peter, let's not forget Peter. Another one in the books. Happy fall.
Happy fall. Get something unusual, folks.
That's right. Unusual is better. We all love an oddball.